It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. My friend Jake and I were headed to a wedding in rural Minnesota, and rather than opting for a hotel, we decided to try out an Airbnb. "It'll be an adventure," Jake had said when we booked the place. Little did we know how true those words would become. We arrived at the farmhouse just as dusk was setting in. The sky was painted with hues of orange and purple, but dark clouds loomed on the horizon, hinting at the approaching storm. The Airbnb was more secluded than we had expected, nestled amidst sprawling fields and dense woods. It was quaint, a picture, perfect postcard of rural charm, with its weathered wooden siding and a wraparound porch. As we unloaded our bags, the first rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, sending a shiver down my spine. Jake, ever the optimist, just laughed it off. "Adds to the ambience, doesn't it?" he joked. We spent the evening unpacking and preparing for the wedding the next day. The house, though charming, had an air of neglect about it. The floors creaked with every step, and the wind whistled through cracks in the windows. Nightfall brought an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional distant thunder. We sat on the porch, watching the lightning dance across the sky. "Creepy, isn't it?" Jake mused, but his tone was light, unbothered. I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease, though. There was something about the isolation of the farmhouse, the way the shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, that put me on edge. We decided to call it a night early, wanting to be fresh for the wedding. As I lay in bed, listening to the increasing intensity of the storm outside, I couldn't help but feel like we were not alone. The house groaned and sighed as if it were alive. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, a faint knocking sound caught my attention. It seemed to be coming from downstairs. I lay there, frozen, straining my ears to hear it again. But there was nothing, just the sound of the wind and the distant rumbling of thunder. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe some animal outside. Yet, sleep didn't come easily that night. I had the unsettling feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes lurking in the darkness. As the thunderstorm raged outside, I couldn't shake off the feeling that this weekend was going to be anything but ordinary. The wedding had been a blur of laughter, dancing, and too much champagne. By the time Jake and I returned to the farmhouse, the sky had turned an ominous shade of black, and the wind howled like a beast in agony. We stumbled inside, our heads spinning not just from the alcohol, but also from the uncanny darkness that enveloped the house. I remember collapsing into bed, the world spinning around me. But sleep, which should have come easy, eluded me. I tossed and turned, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. The storm outside raged on, thunder cracking so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open. It must have been past midnight when I first heard it, a faint knocking. At first, I thought I was imagining it, a trick of my intoxicated mind. But then it came again, clearer this time, a steady tap-tap, tapping like someone gently rapping at the window. I lay there, frozen, every nerve in my body screaming to stay put. But curiosity, or maybe it was fear, got the better of me. I crept out of bed, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The house was pitch black, the power evidently knocked out by the storm. I fumbled for my phone, using it as a makeshift torch, and made my way towards the sound. The knocking grew louder as I approached the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear over its thuds. I reached the window, the source of the sound, and braced myself. With a trembling hand, I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. There was nothing there but the storm. Ravaged night, branches swaying wildly in the wind. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, though my voice lacked conviction. I stood there for a moment longer, staring into the darkness, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. When I returned to bed, Jake was snoring softly, oblivious to the night's disturbances. I envied his ignorance. I lay awake, listening to the storm, to the house settling, to the distant, unexplained noises that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The knocking didn't return that night, but something inside me had shifted. The quaint charm of the farmhouse now felt oppressive, like we were trapped in the belly of some slumbering beast. And as I finally drifted off to sleep, a part of me feared what the morning light might reveal. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to a gray, stormy day. The thunderstorm had not let up, and the farmhouse felt even more isolated in the daylight. I found Jake in the kitchen, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he poured himself a coffee. "He was there, outside the window," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. I paused, the memory of last night's knocking fresh in my mind. "Who was?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "A man," Jake replied, looking out the window into the rain, soaked fields. Just standing there, staring. When I blinked, he was gone. I wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the light or a shadow cast by the trees, but the fear in Jake's eyes was real. We debated packing up and leaving, but the idea of driving in the storm seemed just as dangerous. We decided to stay, rationalizing that it was just our nerves getting the better of us. As the day progressed, the atmosphere in the farmhouse grew heavier. We heard creaks and groans from the old structure, but now they seemed more sinister. Several times, I caught a glimpse of something moving outside the window, but when I looked directly, there was nothing. The feeling of being watched was constant. We tried to distract ourselves with games and books, but the sense of unease lingered. To make matters worse, we discovered that our cell phones had no service, and the farmhouse's internet was down, leaving us cut off from the outside world. As evening approached, the storm intensified. The thunder was deafening, shaking the very walls of the farmhouse. It was during one of these thunderclaps that we heard it, a distinct sound of footsteps upstairs. We froze, looking at each other in silent horror. There was no mistaking it. Someone or something was moving above us. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find: a frying pan for me, a fireplace poker for Jake, and crept towards the stairs. Every step creaked under our weight, betraying our movement. As we reached the top, footsteps stopped. We moved from room to room, finding nothing but the unsettling emptiness. Just when we thought it might have been our imagination, a loud bang came from downstairs. We rushed down to find the back door swinging open, the wind howling through it. Rain poured into the kitchen, but there was no sign of anyone. That night, we barricaded ourselves in one of the bedrooms, pushing a dresser against the door. The sounds continued: footsteps, knocking, and the occasional glimpse of a shadow passing under the door. We stayed awake, clutching our makeshift weapons, jumping at every sound, waiting for the dawn. The storm outside mirrored the chaos in our minds, an unending torrent of fear and confusion. As the night dragged on, one thing became clear: we were not alone in that farmhouse. The night was relentless, and so was our fear. Jake and I barely spoke, our eyes fixed on the bedroom door, our ears straining to pick up any sound over the storm's cacophony. The thunder seemed to be right above us, each boom shaking the farmhouse as if it were trying to rip it from its foundations. It was during one particularly loud thunderclap that we heard it, the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal. We exchanged a look of terror. Someone was picking the lock on the front door. The reality of our situation sunk in. We were not just spooked by an old house or a storm. We were in real danger. I fumbled with my phone, the battery dangerously low. With shaky hands, I dialed 911, praying for a signal. Miraculously, the call went through. I whispered our location and situation, hearing the dispatcher's voice crackle through the speaker, promising that help was on the way. But deep down, I knew the truth. The storm had made the roads nearly impassable. We were on our own. The door downstairs creaked open. We could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, making their way through the house. Each step was a hammer blow to our frayed nerves. We pushed the dresser harder against the bedroom door, but it felt futile. The intruder was coming for us. Then, the unthinkable happened. The door started to give way under the intruder's force. Jake and I grabbed whatever we could, chairs, a lamp, anything to defend ourselves. The door burst open, and there he was, a man, drenched from the storm, his eyes wild and unfocused. What happened next was a blur of adrenaline and terror. We fought with a desperation I never knew I had. There were shouts, the sound of breaking glass, the feeling of fists and feet colliding. Through it all, the thunder roared, as if cheering on the violence. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The intruder lay motionless on the floor. We didn't wait to see if he was alive or dead. We bolted from the room, down the stairs, and out into the storm. We didn't stop running until we saw the flashing lights of the police cars. The officers found us, soaked and shivering, a mile down the road. They took us back to the farmhouse, where they discovered the intruder had vanished. No trace of him remained, not even the blood we were sure should have been there. In the days that followed, Jake and I spoke little of what happened. The experience had bound us in a way that words couldn't express. We left Minnesota with a story that no one would believe, a story that would haunt our dreams for years to come. As I write this, the sound of thunder still sends a chill down my spine. It reminds me of that night, of the fear, the fight, and the feeling of being preyed upon. Some might say it was just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I know better. That farmhouse wasn't just a building. It was a trap, and we were the bait. And somewhere out there, the man who said it is still waiting, perhaps for the next storm, the next unsuspecting guests. And when the thunder rolls in, echoing across the fields, he'll be ready to strike again.